So here we are in chapter 3 of Mum's life story, and today, Mum, we must be up to your journey from Mackay, I suspect. So in our last video you talked about Papa moving there the year before you. He was there for a year on his own because he had to find a house. And then what happened from there? We haven't gone on to the journey of you moving there and what Papa did then.
Well, before we actually moved there and he was in Mackay, we all had to do a fair bit of work. Auntie Cairns used to have to do the mowing and between us all to help Mum because Dad was gone for a year. Well, then when he eventually got us the house, it was opposite St Mary's School in Mackay where Carmel, Brenda and I went to, and then in the end Michael and Kathy, Chris and Bernadette went to the same school. That we had a lot to do with that school. Now the house we had was an old type house, and underneath it was high block, underneath was just dirt, and one year we had a fairly big flood that all the water came under the house. It didn't affect us, but our only toilet was downstairs, so we'd have to go down to the toilet and you'd have to walk through the mud, and when it all dried out it was terrible because there was all these mud footmarks everywhere that made it very, very uneven. Because we lived opposite the school and it was a quiet street, we would sometimes get out of a weekend and play softball with the family across the road, and we had shorts, not as short as you wear today, but we did have shorts. But in those days the nuns didn't like shorts, so when we'd get to school sometimes on a Monday we'd get into trouble for wearing shorts. Another thing we did do was that the church, when the nuns went away, they always looked after the altar, and in those days you had the sanctuary light, and at St Mary's at South Mackay the sanctuary light was one that you pull down, so you'd have to pull it down, take the container out and fill it with oil and so forth and push it back up, and we had to do the flowers and so forth. And our Auntie Brenda was doing it one time and she missed putting the container back in the thing, and the oil went all over the carpet on the floor of the sanctuary. So that was a bit of a hassle because in the end they had to get the carpet all very, very cleaned.
How old would Auntie Brenda have been around that time?
Well, when we went up there, I would have been about 8. Auntie Brenda would have been about 12, I suppose.
So she would have felt terrible, and probably Mama and Papa probably felt terrible too. So was that something that you regularly like?
Well, for the couple of years that we lived there, we did it just when the nuns went away. But then eventually, that was just a rented home, and eventually we bought in Wellington Street.
What was the address of the rented home? I remember where it
4
was.
Morley Street.
4 Morley Street.
Yes.
Is that where that big brick home is still today? Or?
It's the big brick home is on the corner, but it wasn't then. It was an old tin house with a lot of mango trees. And I saw the fellow Croftons that used to live in it there. They were in those days communists, which we weren't too keen on.
How did you know they were communists?
Oh, well, they sort of made it out like the Hansons. You knew they were communists. They always sort of said they were.
Wow.
And I just saw only earlier this year where Darryl Crofton, who was sort of our ages, where he had died. So then when we moved round to Wellington Street, and I can still remember the day they were shifting our furniture, we were sitting in the gutter outside Morley Street, and this huge funeral left St Mary's Church, and we were sort of counting the cars, didn't even know whose funeral it was. And when we went around to live in Wellington Street, our next door neighbours, who became our really great friends, Auntie Cairns and John, Barry, Brian and Loretta, it was her husband, their father, that had got hepatitis from the Mackay show. He was 33 and he died, and because he was young, that's why it was this big funeral. And to think then that we had a lot to do with the Cairnses then.
And Auntie Cairns, Irene Cairns has become a bit like a grandmother to us. We all loved Auntie Cairns because they lived next door to us then, and she became a very big part of our family, didn't she? As well as your family growing up.
Well, the same with Mark Hurton. But you're all younger because we come down to the farm, and I can remember when you were having a birthday when you finished scholarship, I think it was. I went up for her funeral in Mackay, and we'd been at the farm then. But Mrs. Curtin at the back, they called her Ma Curtin. She had the big mango tree too, which that loved, and of course everybody had chooks. And between our houses in those days, because you didn't have the big old tin fences like today, you had the palings, and they made either a thing that you lifted it up and hopped through, which was to Mrs. Heron's and then McCullum's. But to Auntie Cairns, we had a gate. And Mark Curtin at the back, we had the palings that just sort of lifted up. Mackay.
They were just going on that. So Ma and Auntie Cairns were obviously a significant part in Mum's family's life growing up, and we really loved both of those ladies as well. And often when Mum and Dad might have gone somewhere, Ma Curtin and Auntie Cairns and Auntie Kit were our three main babysitters. The five of us were shared between the three ladies, and we loved all three because we didn't have any other family in Mackay, so they were our family.
Yeah, because Auntie Kit was a big in your life too.
Did you have a lot to? So when you were young, growing up with them, because so you grew up with them and we grew up with them actually.
Yeah.
Did they look after you a bit, or what was your?
Oh, we were all. See, I was about 7. Oh, and I'd have been we went there in 1950, so I'd have been 40. I'd have been 11 when we went to Wellington Street, so none of us needed looking after. But Timmy Curtin, he was about Auntie Brenda's age, and then the others were that sort of bit older. But we had more to do with the Cairnses. But because Mr. Cairns had died, John was put, an uncle or something paid for him. He went to boarding school in Charters Towers. So we didn't have a lot to do with John, but we had a lot to do with Barry and Brian. Then I had a lot to do with Brian and Loretta sort of thing. Then Mark...
Did they go to school with you, Mum, at St Mary's?
Well, Loretta did, but Barry and Brian were at the Brothers. So you went to the Brothers when you were grade 4.
So when you what year did you arrive from Toowoomba, and what grade?
Well, we went to Toowoomba when I went into grade 2 at
St Mary's.
But see, in those days you did prep 1, prep 2 was 1 year, prep 3, prep 4, then you did grade 1.
Prep 1, prep 2 was what, half a semester each sort of thing?
Yes, and then prep 3, prep 4 was sort of over 2 years you did that, and then you went into grade 1, but you didn't have kindergarten and all that, see.
So prep 3, prep 4 was a bit like...
But nearly like a proper grade 1 or preschool sort of thing.
And when you went into grade 1, were you 5? Is that
well, I was trying to work out. I probably would have been 6 in the September, or I might have been 7 in the September. Okay, I should have worked that out.
And when you went to Mackay, you went into grade 2?
Yes, when I went to Mackay, I went into grade 2.
What year did you...
Well, we went to Mackay at the end of 47, so we started up there in 48.
Started there at 48 and you went into grade 2.
Yeah, so I must have been, because I was born in 39, so I must have been about 8 or 9 when we went up there, something like that.
And the boys left St Mary's to go to the Brothers, so they weren't there in grade 4? Or was their last year grade 3?
Well, we didn't know them because the first 2... No, Auntie Cairns and them lived at West Mackay. They'd only come and lived not long before we lived there,
so
because...
Had he moved there too, Mr. Cairns? Auntie Cairns?
Yeah, they'd lived there because it was Auntie May Cairns' house. Right. And she was a spinster. And Auntie Cairns and her husband and that, he didn't have a great job, and they had 4 children, so they come to live with Auntie May, and then they just lived there. Even after Auntie May died, they lived there because...
So Auntie May was Mr. Cairns' sister.
Yes, but she never married.
Okay, and just getting back to the St Mary's, because Michael went there too, of course, and went to the Brothers. What year? So he did up till grade 3. Is that what you did back then? Up till grade 3.
Yeah, grade 4. You did grade 4, and then you went to the Brothers in grade 5.
Right. Okay.
So, and you made your communion and all that at St Mary's, and he went up to the brothers. But see, Chris didn't go to the brothers because he was only, by the time we went to, see, Bernadette had only done grade 1 and Chris had done grade 3. So he come and went to Toowoomba. He was in grade 4 at Toowoomba.
So getting back then to you said you went to St Mary's. So you moved into Wellington Street, and you're about to tell a story about that, or?
Oh well, yes. Well then, after that, then we went. When you finished at St Mary's, we all went to St Patrick's Convent. Was the only, but they only had small classes. I had only 16 in my class.
And what grade did you go to St Patrick's?
Well,
Convent?
we all went to grade, what was called junior, which was equivalent to grade 10.
So you would have done grade 8, 9 and 10 there, or at St
No,
Patrick's?
9 and 10, because you did up grade 8. You did up grade 8 was called scholarship, which was at the primary school.
Oh, so it went up to grade 8 at that point?
At the time, yes, and then you did sub-junior and junior, which was 9 and 10 at the high school. Then if
and that was St Patrick's. Was that the St Patrick's on the water there, was it?
Yeah. If you had, Auntie Cairns wanted to go on and to do a senior to become a chemist, but my parents didn't have the money, so she got out and she got into the Commonwealth Bank. And in those days, if you got the Commonwealth Bank or she got into, she was going to get into another place and they didn't like Catholics. So she got into the Commonwealth Bank, which was regarded as a good job. If anybody got into a Commonwealth Bank or a government job, well then, then Auntie Brenda went on and did grade 9 and 10, and I did grade 9 and 10. But as I said, if you want to become a teacher or go to the uni, you went to the state school to do 11 and 12. The first time at the Catholic school, there was 2 girls from my class, Kathy McGuire and Pat Healy, who did grade 12. They were the first 2 to do grade 12 at the convent school, and then gradually grade 12, 11 and 12 did take on at the school.
So was that OLMC?
Well, it wasn't then, it was still St Pat's. Right. And then gradually, as it got more, because our school was just a little school underneath the nuns' convent, that's where we were. But gradually, as more were starting to do higher classes, they built Our Lady of Mercy College at South Mackay near the church. And so
the one beside the high school, beside the primary school. So you actually never went there, though.
No.
Wow. That's amazing. So you basically what you're saying is Auntie Cairns really wanted to go on, but she couldn't. Was that because it being a state school, it wouldn't have cost any money to go, would it?
Well, I can't remember why she didn't go on, but Dad and Mum
might have wanted her to work to get
or something. I don't know. So she worked, and then when Auntie Brenda finished, she wanted to go nursing immediately, and Mama and Papa wouldn't let her. They thought she was too young. So she went and worked at the office of the electricity board, MEB, might have been called Mackay Electricity Board, I'm not quite sure. She worked there for a while, and then when she got old enough, they let her go and she went nursing.
Could she have gone nursing straight from school back then? Could she have gone from the age of 15?
Yes, but Mum and Dad wouldn't let her. Then when she and another girl, Carmel Mackenzie, went down to start nursing in Grafton, and they found Grafton was absolutely terrible. So they left and come back, and while they were waiting to get into nursing in Brisbane, they worked at Maxim Cheese, doing something with cheese. Then they started...
Down in Mackay or...?
No, down here in Brisbane.
Okay.
And Auntie Brenda lived with Dad's brothers, who were all bachelors at Wollongabba. And
would have been entertaining, wouldn't
it? They started work at the Royal Brisbane, and then the PA opened, so they transferred over, and they were sort of amongst the first nurses at the PA, and they had a nurses' quarters where all the nurses lived.
This was to do their training.
And
that's pretty amazing. So Auntie Brenda always wanted to be a nurse from a really young age.
So she became the nurse, and then, as I said, then she worked in Melbourne for a long while to do her midwifery, and then she'd met Jack, who was on a boat in Melbourne. He was an engineer on a boat, and eventually she went over to England and worked there for a couple of years. With myself, I finished grade 10, and then I did get into the Commonwealth Bank, but I'd also been offered this job at what was then called the Department of Labour and National Service / Commonwealth Employment Service. So I took that job, and to me it was the best job in Australia.
Why was it the best job in Australia?
Well, there was only 3 men and myself, and I could, I didn't work, and I never took sick leave or anything like that. But we all got on extremely well. Mr. Crow was our MC, and Mr. Jackson. Yeah, we're all very.
Where was the address of that, Mum? Do you remember the address, whereabouts exactly that was?
In Mackay.
Yeah.
Well, it was funny. I started off down in 24 Wood Street. It was way down what you nearly call the crummy end of town, and then it shifted to up near the courthouse in Wood Street, and that was all right. We were right beside the courthouse. And then it shifted finally down to, I don't know, probably it's not there today now, down next door to Hartley's, the optometrist. And everybody knows I love that hymn, Mother, Mother, I Am Coming. And when we were there, the little girl Hartley died, and we went to her funeral, and they sang that song. And I've always thought of that, always. And I had a great job and a great young life. I did play a lot of sport. I can't remember when they played sport. They played hockey, and I think they might have played a bit of Vigoro. I didn't play those. We all played tennis, but I played a lot of squash, a lot of American basketball as it was called, and I played softball till the day I was married. I love softball. We had a great youth group. I was in the National Catholic Girls Movement, where a lot of us met, and then we were in the YCW, which was Young Christian Workers, and that's where all the girls and boys, and every St Patrick's Day we did a Irish reel in the St Patrick's concert. None of us had cars, so we used to go bike riding.
So you couldn't have gone very far, probably, back in those days. You could have, you went as far as you could ride your bike.
Well, on a Sunday we'd ride to Marion, which was about 30 miles in those days.
Wow. So everyone was probably pretty fit naturally back then.
Yes, we rode a bike everywhere.
Yeah.
So, and then, as I said, after that, with the church, the Catholic Church, and that we did a lot. We used to clean the church. And then this chap used to go to Mass, and one of the fellows that cleaned the church with us lived in the same spot, and he got in to come along, and that's how I met Michael James Flynn.
Oh, so you were cleaning the church together at St
Yes,
Mary's,
and that's
South Mackay.
And we did something that probably nobody would do today. We got engaged with the priest in front of Our Lady's altar.
Wow.
At St Mary's.
So what priest was that?
It was Father was it Father McCardle? Father McCardle married us, so it might have been Father McCardle, because we were engaged for about 7 months, so I suppose it might have been Father McCardle. Yeah.
So when you say you got engaged, did Dad, how did that process work? You went to the church and he asked you to marry him in front of the priest, is that what you meant?
No, he must have asked Dad, my father first, and then we both decided that we'd go to the church, and he asked the priest to come over here and bless the ring in front of Our Lady's altar. So yes, so you probably wouldn't get that much today.
So did Dad choose the ring, or how did that work?
We both looked at it, because in those days it mightn't be much now, but that ring in those days was a fairly expensive ring.
I'll have to, I don't know if you can see that, can you? I'll have to do a close-up.
And it was pounds in those days, and I have a feeling it was £300, which was a lot of money then. It's lost a little diamond at the side, and of course it's been that thin. I've had to get them joined together, but no, we both sort of chose it, and yes, and then
about £300. So Dad, what was your impressions of Dad when you first met him? Will you remember anything?
Well, he was much he was a fairly big man, he sort of lived with Mrs. Collins and them, so he didn't iron his shirt much, but I can always remember he wore a green shirt a lot. He was the first one that we never had a car, and he had a blue Ford Falcon, which in the end then I learnt to drive on.
So did he, because he was one of your first people that you met that had a car, it would have been a joy going for a drive in the car, I imagine?
Yes, because I'd gone with a fellow for many years, about 3 years beforehand, and we had to walk or ride our bike everywhere. He never had a car.
What was his name?
John Matson, and he only died about 2 years ago, and he married a very good friend of ours, okay. But he died here in Brisbane.
So that would have been an exciting thing. So really the experience with Dad was also your first experience in a car, driving everywhere.
Yes, because we had, Kit Bowes, they had won a car, Kit Bowes, and they used to take Dad, in those days you had 6 seats, so they used to take Pat and the two of them, and Dad and Mum and myself. It was an old green Zephyr, and they had that for a long, long time, and because they'd won it. So we did get out a little bit like that, but my parents never had a car.
So something we take for granted now, driving a car, for you that wasn't in because your parents never had a car.
Never. No,
and
never.
Papa never drove a car, and neither did Mama.
Mama walked everywhere, and Dad rode a bike everywhere.
Yeah, it's quite amazing, isn't it?
And none of us, till we came to live on the farm, we never ever had a phone. If anybody ever rung us, they'd ring Auntie Cairns or Mrs. Heron. Yeah. And that was the only way.
Well, I still even remember that. So as a child, we didn't have a phone, which is quite amazing. No. And I left at the age of 10, I think, left Mackay. So up to the age of 10, we had no phone. And because I can remember Auntie Cairns coming to us next door to say that Granny Flynn was on the phone from Toowoomba, because she had a phone at the farm, and she'd be coming to tell us Granny was ringing back in 5 minutes or something, didn't she? Yeah. So you met Dad, and you can't. So first impressions, he was a quiet fellow.
He was a quiet fellow. Yeah, no. And of course, I suppose in those days, I went to church nearly every morning in my life, and he was one that went a fair bit of a morning, ever before I really knew him, and I suppose that appealed to me. And in those days, because we nearly all sort of married Catholics, he was a Catholic.
So ticked all the boxes too, Mum. So
I don't even, perhaps even being a teacher mightn't have, because my father worked on the railway, and I suppose to me, as long as you had a job, you didn't have to have any highfalutin sort of jobs, and it just sort of we clicked. He'd had a girlfriend a long while back, but I don't think he'd had one much, because then Dad was 27 when we got married, and I was 24. You
got married the 4th of January 1964. And what was Mama and Papa's? How did they get on?
They got on really well. They loved him, because I think they'd have always liked a son. I lost a younger sister at birth, and then Mum had a miscarriage somewhere along the line, but she always would have loved a son, and he became, how Rod and that, mine are to me.
So they got on quite well. Dad talked to them, and they talked to him.
Dad got on very Dad and they got on very well.
And I guess being Catholic, they would have been very happy that their daughter.
And he was. Dad was good at maths, and my father was extremely good at maths. My father would have loved to have been an engineer, which not many were going back in those days. But again, see, his parents, he was one of 6 boys, and he was the 3rd boy, and his mother was only 21. So she had 3 children by the time she was 21.
You're talking about
Papa's mother. Yeah, so she was
6 boys. And his mother was 21 when she
had her dad, who was her 3rd boy.
Wow.
And she lost a girl. Yes.
Oh wow.
So, so he couldn't go on, but Dad was good at maths then, and probably Auntie Brenda says she's never real clever, but she really is. Auntie Carmel probably was our brightest.
I think you're all bright, Mum. I think all 3 of you.